Okay, so I've openly said my main issue with Christopher Nolan is that I think he's a great director who tries to mask his flaws as a flustered and contrived writer. So Dunkirk felt like the perfect stripped down palate cleanser to allow him to shine within his element without the need for an exposition heavy script. While it's certainly not as engaging as I wanted it to be, I honestly don't know what I was expecting, I do want to talk about something that stood out to me. The major crux people had with this film is the lack of character that makes it difficult to care, and while I wholeheartedly agree, Nolan's creative intent is very direct on screen. Fundamentally, this is a mood piece. Nolan saw the Battle of Dunkirk as a subversion to Hollywood formulas and expectations. It's not about victory, it's about an objective failure. As a change of pace, patriotism takes a back seat to the emphasis on survival, and the more I thought about it, the less I saw this as a war film and more of a disaster movie. We aren't witnessing a battle or any technical conflict, we are watching soldiers trying to escape with their lives while everything keeps falling apart around them, and this completely detaches it from a traditional narrative structure. Now, disaster movies have a bad reputation, but the point of them is that they're about the impact of the environment, and the film is very clear about this by focusing on the perspective of land, sea, and air, as opposed to any defined character. This way, the entire essence of the film rests on this one moment in time. It certainly isn't unheard of, Terrence Malick made a career out of it, but the film takes on a documentary-like style, and I'm not just talking visually, I'm talking narratively. For one, the non-chronological nature of the story seems contrived at first, naturally it being a Nolan film, but retrospectively, it's actually quite organic to the film's emphasis on maintaining the psyche of being in a very stressful, life-threatening environment where disaster is just as instantaneous as death. In fact, small details such as the hole in the pier, or a broken fuel gauge, or even the tide coming in, are subtle but effective enough at showing how small details are just as potentially dangerous as bombing raids. It's the metaphorical snowball effect common in Nolan films where something insignificant can define the larger picture, and even when they aren't around, the presence of these issues still lingers. It feels more exploratory than structured, so although it seems relatively unfocused, it does emphasize disorientation with nuance and readability, without becoming the aggressively in-your-face style of Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. This way, it can heighten the sensation of drowning, hypothermia, or even just being uncomfortable, whilst remaining observant to remind you that it's a more meditative interpretation as opposed to just capturing a sense of authenticity that can easily be misled. Like Nolan himself says, it never seeks to claim validity in terms of feeling and emotion like Spielberg's film. He treats it with a level of objectivity, such as avoiding real-life accounts of the situation, to instead create this universal experience of fear during war, minus the sensationalism. Going back to that emphasis on time, it comes out with greater impact through the implementation of sound in an unconventional way. Yes, the sounds of incoming bomber planes is horrifying, but more importantly, Hans Zimmer's soundtrack is also narratively purposeful than simply helping to accentuate emotion. It's actually a clock for the film when time becomes less temporal due to the non-chronological structure of the story. The misunderstanding of time escalates this frustrated impatience of waiting, and the ticking of the soundtrack doesn't effectively go away until the credits roll. The central character of the piece reinforces this by hearing a persistent ticking right up until the moment he can actually breathe, but it becomes so repetitive and ultimately synonymous with how close to death he was. There's actually a simple yet poetic line that a civilian says to one of the returning soldiers who is distraught at their retreat. As the people cheer, the soldier says, "All we did was survive," and the civilian replies, "That's enough." I think this was the trigger moment for me that I'll always remember. The film doesn't overshadow its tragedy, but it does treat hope with maturity, subtlety, and even dignity. The mentality of war for these young soldiers putting their lives on the line for their country was enough. Nobody expected them to win because they've already committed themselves to something that the clear majority of us would never do. As the film's tagline says, survival is victory, as these supposedly faceless troops in the eyes of many other war movies aren't lost amongst the destruction and devastation of war. Without traditional characters, the film is free to emphasize this one collective experience without having to cynically perpetuate just how expendable or replaceable most of these men were. The minute they come home is the point where we can reflect on how failure and retreating isn't the point, but rather what these guys represent, despite how cowardly it can be perceived, is still real human bravery.